So welcome, students. Today we're going to have this lesson on the ethical effects of the IT industry. And hopefully there'll be something that you'll learn here, and certainly it'll be something that'll go toward the exam, though not necessarily toward the quiz next week. So computer ethics and society, society being the wider world into which we fit. So first we've got this topic on ethics of IT organization. So meaning then, if you are working for an IT organization, how does that organization, not just the individuals, but how does that organization as a whole impact its community? Is it a positive thing or is it maybe negative? So let's have a look at that. So some of the things that we're going to look at is how it's impacting the actual workers that work in the IT industry. And we have this concept of contingent worker. So contingent worker just means a worker who doesn't have a solid future outlined in that company. You know what I mean? So basically they're working on a short-term contract, something like that. And so there's a lot of ethical issues regarding that. How is that, how are you treating them? Are you sort of free riding and pushing your certain responsibilities that the employer should have onto the employee or onto society? Whistleblowing, the issue there, or the concept, I don't know if you've heard of that term, but what it means generally. And so in the context that we're going to use it here, we're going to say that whistleblowing means that where you have an employee who notices that there's some unethical practice happening in an organization, and they often, at risk to themselves, they will publicize that unethical behavior. So, I mean, they'd have to be pretty upset, I suppose, to do that, because often whistleblowers get terminated from their work. Sometimes they get prosecuted by their bosses. We'll talk about that a little bit. Electronics manufacturing, what's the ethical issues to do with that? Well, there's a lot of rare earth metals and less rare, but still high energy extraction metals, beryllium, copper, gold, and silver are used in electronics industry. And some of those things in copper and the actual mining of them can be kind of bad for the environment. So that's an ethical issue. And then as it says there about the complex supply chains, where are those things sourced from? Usually there's few countries in the world that have all of those resources that are necessary to make electronics. And particularly nowadays with our high-end electronics, some of the rare earth metals. So for example, you could have a situation where a country could have a monopoly in a particular prerequisite for electronic components, and they could use that for political purposes, which might injure other countries. Green computing is kind of related to that, but has to do also with how much energy you're using while you're doing your computing business. That comes up as an issue for cryptocurrencies, right? Cryptocurrencies, they do this thing called crypto mining, which is just doing a lot of processing to come up with special numbers, which are following through a blockchain. And that uses a lot of energy. And, so that's an issue. But not just that, what about our other computers that we have? Do we, if you're making laptop computers for people, how much energy are they using? Are we using that in the most efficient way? But also, what's happening to the components of those equipment once you're finished with them, right? So are they ending up in the ocean, or are they seeping out through a landfill and poisoning the countryside? So those are all issues that sort of come up, and yeah, there's a lot of issues. So with the term, so we'll look at each of these individually. I just went through them all now in that previous slide, so there's nothing really much new here. The one thing that I didn't just mention was the Information Communication Technology Code of Ethics. There are various groups to which IT professionals and IT companies belong. that have particular codes of ethics that if you want to stay in the organization, you have to not be proven to be breaking these rules of ethics. And so, for example, I belong to the Australian Computer Society, and yeah, we have, there's a bunch of ethics involved with that, and some of them would relate to the things we're talking about today. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, why we're talking about that is because their projections are that there'll be a lot more computer jobs in the future. And there's basically a shortage of computer jobs now, and that's expected to continue on into the future. Maybe that's why you guys decided to have a diploma or degree in computing, you know, probably a good choice. So the projection is many more jobs in that, less jobs in some other things. So, you know, basically you guys should end up doing some of the programming that's going to make other people's lives different, hopefully better. But what that means is companies can't get enough of the well-qualified IT people. They just can't get enough of them. So that means that they have to go and not always just use the traditional sort of way of hiring somebody, you know, hire somebody out of college when they're 21 and they get a pension plan and they stay there until they're like 60 and then they retire on a pension. Probably that's not really working out for the companies. You know what I mean? So my son works in Japan. He's been there for like 3 years. And he says that one of the things that he noticed there is that people aren't really getting promotions. So he works in IT. So he has a master's of IT and he works in IT. But people don't get promotions. But how people get more money and is after a year or two in one job, they'll just go to another job. And they just do that. I mean, and everybody does that. Every time you, you know, if you're not moving jobs every 2 years, you're not getting a pay rise. So everybody's going to move, right? And so, you know, every time they move, they usually get like 20% pay rise, you know, otherwise it wouldn't go, right? And so that's how, and, you know, he's been there for like 3 years and I guess he's had 3 or 4 different jobs. And just like that, you know, just keep getting another one, another better one. And so now that's a particular labor market for IT, but you probably would find something similar to that in other markets as well. You find that IT people tend to have opportunities for them to increase their salary. That often means that they have to just go and take another job somewhere. But so because of that, that means the employer, they're in a bit of a fix, right? How do we get enough qualified people? You know, the ones that we get, they go to another job. You know, we just can't fill all the positions. So they come up with what you'd say non-traditional ways of getting labor, getting IT expertise. And so some of these are there. Contingent workers are mentioned. Maybe they could outsource their labor force, right? So if you know of a pool of labor, a bunch of people that are well qualified, but they don't have visas to work in your country, well, maybe you can join with another a company that works in another country where there's this pool of people that will work and they have the skills and you don't need to bring them into your country. You know, you can do it outsourcing out offshore. And so that happens. The other thing is the temporary visa workers. It's a big thing in the United States. You know, they have their they have various workers visas there, but in the IT industry actually takes up a lot of those short-term visas. And some of them become longer term. Okay, so the thing is there, I guess my simple test that I gave you at the start of the course was, okay, what's the sort of 2-second description of what ethics are? Is ethics, well, you shouldn't hurt anybody, right? I mean, if your actions are injuring another person, or if they're injuring yourself, you know, then you have to sort of consider the ethics of it. But we often get into a situation where somebody's got to be hurt, right? So I mentioned that one with the ethical dilemma thing they had with the autonomous car, right? The car, they play that game, right? The cars, the pedestrian runs out into the road. Somebody's going to die. You have to pick which one, right? Is it going to be you or is it going to be the pedestrian? So this is a test of ethics where different people will give different answers. And so that's the same in our works environment, right? People are going to get hurt. You know, who is it going to be and how are they going to be hurt? And where is our greater responsibility? Is it possible to organize ourselves in such a way that nobody gets injured. Maybe. So let's describe this term that I've referred to already a couple times, which is contingent work. Contingent, means sort of as a backup. What do we do if we can't get? So what do we do if we can't get an employee? We get a contingent employee. And so basically it just means that somebody's not there on the books for the long term. They're going to be working on a contract. It might be for a couple of months, might be for a couple of weeks, might be just for until the project's come finished. It might be for a couple of years, but they don't have a long-term job in that organization. And so we'd call that contingent work. Now that has been in the IT industry longer than I've been in the IT industry, right? And I went to work in Telecom Australia in 1987 as a computer systems officer. So I mean, back then we had contractors. I wasn't a contractor, but we had contractors, and so that's what we called them. But they were basically contingent workers, and so a lot of people there are very happy to be a contractor. Why? Because, well, as an employee back in those days, you might be getting, $40 an hour or something like that. As a contractor, you might get $100 an hour. So you might say, well, that's a no-brainer. I should go and be a contractor, right? But what you also have to figure into that is, as an employee, you had health insurance. Okay, well, that wasn't important in Australia because everybody has health insurance. But you had superannuation, which means a pension that was paid into by your employer. You had other benefits. Well, basically, I'm not going to sort of enumerate them all. That was perhaps the biggest one. But you had a lot of other benefits besides just your salary. The other thing is that your employer would take care of your tax, your interaction with the tax office in the first instance. What I mean by that is your employer would take your tax out of your salary and submit it to the tax office. And then you, at the end of the year, would organize your tax. But for contractors, they didn't do that, right? And so the contractor just got their money and it's all on them. So the contractor was taking a little bit of liability on themselves. The other thing the contractor is taking liability on is often they're on a 3-month contract, right? What do you do at the end of the 3-month contract? Well, I suppose you spend the last month looking for another contract, right? I don't know. I never worked on it. My son-in-law does that. He works for a bank in Australia, and he actually goes to Bangalore, India, like once a year to go and talk to the outsourcing people. There you go. So yeah, professional employer. And so these things sort of arose a lot. But even back then, temporary temp centers, they would call them. It wasn't just for IT people, that was for like secretarial staff and stuff like that. The idea being that you need somebody to just come and do work for a little while. You could just go to this place and they would give you the person on an hourly rate. So it would be IT people, accounting people, and sort of general business office staff people. You could just get them to come in and work for a couple of weeks. Now, what are the benefits on that? As I said, that all those overhead costs that the employer takes on them, they have to have an HR department. I mean, they have to manage their pension. They have to manage their taxes. Here in Qatar, they would have to manage their housing. So there's a lot of costs that the employer is taking on them. And so if you do the temporary thing, right? Well, the temp agency takes all of that. And so it makes it very, very flexible for the employer. The employer's going to like that. Employee leasing and the PEOs, they're kind of related to that. Again, these types of things, they will take all those extra costs and all of those risks on themselves, and so that the employer doesn't have to do it. So you could see why employers might like that. So sounds pretty good, right? If you're an employer, you should just get the most temporary staff you can, because these other organizations will take all those risks. Is there any risk to the employee in doing employer in doing that? Well, I guess you have to think about that for a bit, and maybe there is. So there's a little bit more on those. With employee leasing, you can get a company that maybe they just have like 20 IT staff, but they also have an HR department that works with those, and they will just lease these staff out just on an hourly basis. And so, as I said, they're taking all of that risk on themselves. Brings us to this concept of the gig economy. I think that's kind of a new word. I think it's kind of like a 2010s word, 2020s word. and you probably heard of it. If you ask me in 1990, what is a gig? Well, that's what musicians do when they turn up on a. Sorry for doing all the family references, but I have a how would you call him? In-law in Australia, and that's what he does to make money on the weekends. Is he goes to hotels and sings and plays a guitar, and that's a gig, right? So I mean, it's not a job where they pay you a salary. It's like he goes to the hotel and he sings, and then they give him some money, and I don't even know how they work it out. Maybe they say, oh, well, that'll be $200 for tonight, or maybe they say, well, we'll see how many people come, and maybe you can have some tips. But that's a big deal. People do that. People do that as a living. Now he doesn't do that as a living. That's what he does on the weekend. So it probably isn't that good a living. I don't know. I have to ask him when I go and see him. The independent. Oh, so how does that relate to us? Well, yeah. So the gig is you turn up at the hotel at 7 o'clock and you sing until 11 o'clock, and then they give you some money. It's a very short-term relationship, right? And it's just, they don't consider you an employee. You're just here, do your thing, you get out. And so that would be, you could say, those short-term contracts. The guy, you say, okay, yes, we got this system, we need it to be built. You're going to be this person in that, and you're gonna, and we're going to pay you this much to do it. And then when it's gone, it's gone. Again, another family reference. Sorry to mention this. My daughter works in Australia, and she has qualifications in project management, and she works for the Queensland government on a gig economy basis. So she worked for 3 months on a contract, a really nice contract, like she's the boss, and then find another one, maybe. I don't know what you think of that gig economy. Does it sound good? I think it's not great for employees, but well, they can make good money at the time, right? You're doing this $100 an hour thing or something. And yes, the independent contractor is absolutely related to that. So this independent contractor, they set themselves up as if they're their own business, right? It's like, here I am. Look at all my qualifications. You'll see them on LinkedIn, maybe. And they're going to say, well, look, I got all these skills. And often they may have worked in a big company at some point, and they developed a bunch of skills in those big companies, and maybe they even developed some contacts, because it might be kind of hard to be an independent contractor just coming out of college. So they worked in a couple of big companies, and then they know a few people, and then they get a contract here, and then they get a contract there, and then and it just goes like that. When I say big companies, that could also be the government. So again, going back to Australia, so that's what I know. If you were an independent contractor, and this would be the same in the United States, you set yourself up very differently to your average employee. I mean, the way that you pay taxes is different. Okay, so in the United States, you do a W-2 instead of a 1099, they call it. In Australia, you'd set yourself up and you'd say, I am a business. So you pay business tax. Sounds good, right? Yeah. All right. So you would do that because there would be some benefits that you could have. Because if you had a business, you could say, well, all the things that I do, my car, this room in my house, all my computers, that's my business. And so all the money that I spend on that, that's tax deductible. Yeah, that's awesome, which you couldn't do if you're an employee. Well, you could do to a certain extent, but you could write all those things up. We call it writing it off, which would reduce your income, so you pay less tax. That sounds great, but what's the downside of it? The downside of it is business tax is payable on the first dollar, whereas pay-as-you-go employee tax, there's a threshold. And so like in Australia, it's like $25,000. What that means is you can earn $25,000 without paying any tax. As a business person, you can't do that. No, you pay tax on the first dollar. So you're going to have to be earning sort of more than the average person for the business thing to work out. So, I mean, there's lots of risks there. And well, if you're in the United States, you'd have to organize your own health insurance. You know what I mean? If you're in Australia, that would be covered. Some issues there. All right. When I say it would be covered, Australia has kind of like here in Qatar. We're pretty lucky here in Qatar. Everybody's got health insurance, right? Nobody gets sick and can't go to hospital. Everybody. And so yeah, that's not the same in every country. So why would I want to be a contractor? Well, maybe I want to work for 3 weeks and then travel in Europe for three weeks. You could do that, you know. You don't have to wait for your holiday. You just, okay, at the end of this contract, instead of getting another contract, I'll go off. You could do that. Maybe you like to look at different things. Maybe you're a really, really smart person and you can pick up things really quick, and you're looking at a future career of being some kind of like McKinsey consultant. You know, these guys that come in and tell people how to run their businesses better. And so certainly by being an independent contractor, you're going to see a lot of different businesses. And so you're going to broaden your understanding of the particular field. So, I mean, you could zone in on a particular talent, and, you know, maybe it's writing Python code, or, you know, or maybe it's building websites, whatever. And then, but you could take that talent to a lot of different companies doing a lot of different things, or you could focus on a particular industry. You say, okay, so I'm going to work in the telecommunications industry. So look, I got this gig at Burrito. That was kind of fun. Learned a lot of stuff. Now I'm going to go and work at Vodafone. And then I'm going to go to the UK and work in Three, or France, and I'm going to work in Orange. And I'm going to get all of this sort of really good experience that 10 years from now, some telephone company is going to say, we need a telephone expert computer dude. I'm the one. Look at my resume. I worked in all these companies. I know how telephone companies work. I know how telephone companies work better than the telephone company does, right? Because I've been in like 10 of them. And so, yeah, I'm your man, right? Or your woman. Yeah, that, I think that is what some of them try and do. And I've certainly met people like that. So from the employer's point of view, well, you got all this flexibility, right? I mean, you know, you hire the guy or the lady for 3 months. And if they're good, you can always get them again, right? And if they're not, you find somebody better. The other thing is that, you know, this month I need somebody who's good at Python, but next month I don't. Next month, you know, I need somebody who's good at configuring hardware. So see you later. I'll get this one, right? So you've got that flexibility to bring in the particular skill that you need for the particular job. So from the company point of view, that would be important. Now it mentions there financial pressure. Yeah, companies have financial pressure. That's because they're competing, right? The other company is doing things cheaper, so sells things less. Why are they doing things cheaper? Well, you know, for all kinds of reasons. And one of them might be they can keep their labor costs down. Excuse me. And so that you want to keep those labor costs down as well. And one way that you can keep the labor costs down is when you're finished with the Python programming guy, you let them go. You don't pay them for stuff that they're not doing, right? They're not sitting around the office waiting for for the next Python job. You know, now we're going to get this person. And so, yeah, so that kind of works out. So, advantages for contingent workers. So these are advantages to the company. So you don't have to pay for their benefits. You don't need to pay for their health insurance. You don't have to pay for them to have pension. All those things you don't have to do. They got to take that on. Oh, and this training is a huge thing, right? So I mean, if you can pick people that have honed their skills themselves, maybe they pay them for their own training. So you know, that's kind of bad. You know, imagine you're a contractor, and what do you do on your 2 months off? You go and spend $10,000 getting a bunch of training so you can get your next gig. I don't know, maybe that's not so great. I have seen, and as I said, I worked in a telephone company. I have seen contractors come in and they have particular skills, and the employer will train them, but it's not common. Usually they expect the contractor to come in with the training. And so they might have to pay for that themselves. So that's kind of bad. So sounds like a no-brainer, right? If you're a company, you should have contingent workers, should have people on short contracts. There's lots of benefits to you, and there's no downside. No downside. Okay, well, maybe there is a downside. And one of the downsides is, depending on how long those people have been working in your company, they picked up a lot of what we call industry intelligence, what it is, which I mentioned, right? That's what they're going to sell. You know, 10 years down the line, when you know, somebody wants an IT telecom expert, they're going to get this person because they worked in 5 different companies, right? So, but the problem is, for the telephone company, that's not so great. You know what I mean? That employee, that very smart employee that we're very happy to have for a little while to go and do all this great coding and stuff. When they walk out the door, they're not going with nothing. They're going with a lot of information and intelligence about your business, which could be useful to some other telephone company, or or it could be turned into money by that employee. Now, so I mean, companies are not stupid. They know about that, and we mentioned this in a previous lecture. What they'll do often is they'll make people sign a non-competition. They'll put a clause in their contract which says you can't work in a company like that competes with us for the next 6 months. Otherwise, you can't get this contract. But I think that was also mentioned in that previous lecture that at least in the United States, courts have said, well, you can't just do that. You can't just say to somebody they can't work in the industry. I mean, that's their industry, right? What you can do is you can say, all right, we can write it into the contract that you can't work in a company that competes with us within 100 miles of this office. Okay, so you just go across the country and get another job somewhere else. I'd say so. I think that's the main one. You're going to lose some of the cultural, and I use that in a very narrow term when I'm using that, where I'm talking about a company culture. When I say a company culture, I mean this company does things this way and that company does things that way, right? And so every employee, when they come into a company, they have to learn that, and that takes a couple of weeks. How do we do things in this company? You have to learn that, and that employee is taking that with them, and it's lost to you. And so I mean, you have to pay some other person when they come to learn that. How do we do things in this company? It's going to take them a while. It's not automatic. But the people that are leaving because you're doing this gig thing, they're going to take that with them, and you've lost that. All right. So again, these are just some of those things. I think I mentioned all of those, so I'm not going to go over that anymore. So the only issue on this is that you could be, when I say on this, I mean on this slide, you could be a company and you're hiring workers, doing the gig thing, and you're thinking, look at all that stuff I avoided, right? All I have to do is pay them an hourly rate, and everything else I don't have to worry about. And the IRS, which is the Internal Revenue Service, that's the tax office in the United States, will say, not so fast, right? They have had court cases which have said, according to the relationship that we see that's happening here, maybe you had this guy as a contracted employee for like 7 years or something like that. It doesn't look to us like, this is an arm's length sort of thing. It looks to us like an employee-employer relationship. So you better do, your tax thing. So you could have that happen, because that's the way the courts work, is they don't just look at the thing in black and white, what's on the paper. They look at the actual reality of what they think that relationship is. What does it actually look like? This guy comes to work every time, it's been 7 years, he's taking holidays. He's an employee, man. You got to give him all these employee benefits. You can't sort of avoid it. Where's the one like that? So the classic 2020 gig economy, that would be like Uber, right? That's Uber, right? I mean, and there are states in the United States which have basically said this, right? That, okay, Uber, you got to give these guys health insurance. And what do you think Uber? Well, they don't like that, but I'm sure the Uber drivers like that. But so that's what they're saying. They're saying, look, these guys are coming to work for you. They're not. You can't just pass them off and say they're on their own. No, you gotta do the right thing, like every other employer. You're an employer. You're not just a sort of a contracting firm. Outsourcing, we talked about before. It does lower costs, so they wouldn't do it. So how does it lower costs? Somebody else is more efficient at doing this than you could do it in-house, and so we take them. Now that somebody else might be next door, or they might be in another country. Often they are in another country for reasons that we mentioned, because countries, it doesn't cost the same to live in different places, right? But they might not be. I mean, you could outsource if you had a business in San Francisco, you might want to outsource to I don't know, to Fargo, North Dakota, because it's cheaper to live in Fargo than it is in San Francisco, right? So somebody wouldn't want to live in San Francisco well, I don't know what's wrong with San Francisco, but it's very, very expensive. You get the idea, right? And there are places where there are IT people where it's a lot cheaper to live. And so those places, those people will accept the lower salary because they, yeah. And also their salary would be higher than people that are around them anyways. So that works out as a kind of a win-win. So that's why they would do it. Now, as it says there, to focus on core competencies, maybe you can't find people in the local labor market that can do the work that you want. You know, maybe the type of work that you need from your IT people, there's only a few people that do it, right? And maybe they're all in Bangalore or something. And then, so, okay, well, that's a good reason to do it. Offshore outsourcing is common. And I mentioned, I know this from firsthand experience because that's what my son-in-law does. All right. What are the costs and benefits? So yeah, it can be faster. Now, it can be faster because you might find this whole development team that's developed a package kind of like what you want to do, and they're sort of sitting over there, just sort of plug them in. What are the bad things? I think that these ones are mentioned quite well. You might have communication problems if you're doing a outsourcing to a foreign country. You know, maybe English isn't their first language. You know, maybe there isn't anybody there that you can communicate to in a very easy way. The other thing is, you've got, because you're far away, you've got these sort of layers or doors of that are hiding things from you. You don't actually know how good these people are, right? I mean, that might be a problem for you. And so, yeah, because you can't see them every day. So you kind of just have to trust these people that you've got sort of over there managing it for you. The potential risk for customer data. When Telecom Australia first started doing the outsourcing, and they do all of this now. I mean, I think all of the big processing for Telecom Australia is done like in India or something like that. But this was a big argument politically in the country, is, you know, oh man, you know, there's all of our data sitting in another country, you know, that's a big problem. So that is an argument that you can follow, and it's certainly been made. You wouldn't want your defense force data there, and I mean that would be the argument that the telecoms people made as well. Right? You don't want anything which is sort of strategic to your defense being handled by another country outside of your jurisdiction. That's probably not a great idea. Yeah. Just some things that you might want to use, like in a checklist. If you were going to do offshore outsourcing, you'd want to make sure people have the right skills. You'd want to make sure that they have the right state-of-the-art telecom setup so that they can always be in contact. Want to make sure that their managers are good, etc. So, for example, that's why my son-in-law wouldn't just talk to people on the phone. He'll go to Bangalore, you know, see what they're doing, and then make those decisions on that. All right, so next topic here, and I'm sorry, this is a bit of a long lesson, but we will get through it, promise you. The whistleblowing, fairly simple. You are in a company, the company, or it doesn't have to be a company, often whistleblowers work in the government. But anyways, you're working for somebody and they're doing the wrong thing. And you think that it's wrong enough that somebody needs to know. And so somebody would be maybe everybody through the newspapers or whatever, or maybe to, like in Australia, they have this person called an ombudsman. Ombudsman is actually is put in place by the government, but they're not responsible to the government, so they can make the government do things. It sounds weird, but they do that. So a whistleblower would go to the ombudsman because the ombudsman could sort of stand outside the government and make the government do things. So maybe you know that something is bad that's happening. Somebody is doing something illegal. Now, if you're the top manager of that company, that's not a problem, right? You just go and discipline them. So typically your whistleblower is not going to be in the top management. They're going to be in the middle management or even below that. So the problem is they're noticing the bad behavior in people that have power over them. So they can't just go to that person and say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. Well, maybe they could, but maybe they wouldn't be working there for very long, right? You see what I'm saying? So that's typically the position that the whistleblower's in. they notice that something is bad happening above them. Very, very tricky situation. I mean, so first off, do you know that it's bad? You just might think it is. You know what I mean? So you better get your facts right. First off, you better get your facts right. And then you better make sure that you got that documented. It's not just on what you're saying, right? You better have some emails or some things that have been published in the company. There better be something there, because if it's just you saying it, you know what I mean? You're walking out there on that limb and you're going to cut that limb off with you standing on. So yeah, you better be sure, very, very sure, if you think you're going to be the whistleblower, you better get your facts right. And then, and I think this might be in a separate slide, then you better go and get a good lawyer after you've got your facts right. Now, in the United States, this thing here is some law from the Civil War. And the law came from the Civil War, I think, because I don't know if you know about Civil War, probably don't care. My gosh, the United States split kind of in half, and the North fought against the South. And so because they're fighting against each other, one of the things that they used in their warfare, it's not just all about guns. It's also one way to fight against another country is to stop them from getting stuff. You embargo them, right? That's kind of happening to Russia right now. Right? You don't let their exports go out, and you don't let any imports go in. That really hurts. That's war. And it actually is an act of war. And so the North and the South were doing that. So the South was trying to stop boats going into the North, and the North was trying to stop boats going into the South. The North was more successful in that, and that's probably part of the reason, at least, that they won that war. But there were people who would, you know, they know that that's like that. Okay, so I can make a lot of money. It's called arbitrage, right? I can make a lot of money because I know that the North needs this, and I've got a way of getting it in there. Okay, that's fine from the point of view of the North government. But if you happen to be in the South and they catch you doing that, you know, I mean, it's going to be a problem. So after the Civil War, the government brought in these laws to sort of regulate that. You know, you can't be going around sort of doing things like that. And so that can be used as a law. So it's called the key time provision, that if you can be working just as a private citizen or working in the government, if you notice that somebody in the government's doing this thing, then you can file a suit against them and you'll be protected, and they'll have to pay like 3 times the dollar amount and you'll get a reward. That's kind of cool. So these are things that I mentioned a second ago. If you think that you're working in a company or a government department and they're doing something bad, make sure you get everything lined up, right? Make sure you know that it's happening, not just that you guess. So, I mean, it wouldn't be ethical even for you to be saying things are bad just because you think they are. You got to know. If you just think it is, you might end up being the one in jail, and maybe you deserve to go to jail. You know what I mean? If it's just something that you think, you need to know. And so you need to get that information. You need to, well, look at this thing. You should try and address the situation internally. So what that means is talk to somebody in the organization about the problem and ask them to help you fix it. And at that point, well, notice that we say get the legal, where's the get the legal? Maybe it's on a different slide. But at that point, you might need your legal representation. Develop a plan, make sure you've got it all documented. Oh, so next topic, move on to that, green computing. And we've got a couple of aspects of green computing, which I sort of mentioned earlier. So that includes, what is the computer made of? You know, how much damage is happening to the environment in the process of making this computer? And of course, a lot of that will be in the actual mining of the special metals that are used in creating, and there's some of them are mentioned: beryllium, cadmium, lead, mercury, brominated flame retardants, BFRs, selenium, and polyvinyl chloride. One of those there. Now, beryllium, I wouldn't worry about too much. Lead, mercury, these are heavy metals. Cadmium, lead, mercury. If you're mining that stuff and it gets out into the water, it just kills a lot of people and animals and stuff like that. These are very, very dangerous sort of metals. Selenium, not so much. Polyvinyl chloride, yeah. All right, so then the green computing is, well, how much energy is your computer using? And then how much damage is it doing to the computer, to the environment when you dispose of it? And so what we want to do, if we want to be green, is we want to use less of those hazardous things. Try and not use so much power. And when we dispose of things, we do it in a way which is as not harmful to the environment as possible. So, I mean, there was a big push like 20 years ago to try and recycle computer components. When I say recycle, I don't think that they could, you know, resolder them and use them again. But what I mean is separate the components out and just use them instead of mining them. So the last paragraph there is just about the fact that there are organizations and that work very hard to try and do that, to try and keep people green. And so this is one, they have a tool, electronic product environmental assessment tool, which will help you to see how good you're doing in your organization with all of those dangerous compounds and metals that are in computers. And so you have a code of conduct. How ethical are you in your organization? So you can join this organization and they will, it's kind of like a quality thing, right? But it's just quality for ethics. All right. Social responsibility. I think that came up in an earlier lecture, didn't it? Maybe that was in lecture 1 or 2. Corporate social responsibility, right? So you get the idea there. And as I said, all of these things come back to we're not causing injury. And so to our employees, they must have their human rights upheld, health and safety of them and our customers and everybody else, that we're not damaging the environment, that we're complying with any regulations, and that we have a high standards. Okay. Any questions? I hope I covered that okay. All right. So thank you, students.